everyone, and welcome back to another video. Things have got really interesting. Blizzard have caved from a hardline opinion they've taken with recent progression in the game. We need to welcome that they've done this, but we also need to use it. They've given us an inch, we have to take miles. This is an opportunity to regain ground from Blizzard that has been lost over time in the name of excitement and apparently at the cost of subscribers. Make no mistake, today's video is covering good news. It absolutely is good, but Blizzard need to extend the logic that I'm going to talk about throughout the game. Now, you might have noticed that this is a Saturday and this is not your regular news video. I'm about to be traveling. That video is already in the can, so I'm doing this today, and the regular news, which is really interesting, covers some super cool numbers, that comes out tomorrow. So here's the deal. Blizzard just announced that they are adding a currency in 8.1. I mean, I can hardly believe it. Imagine the idea of owning the sweat of your brow. Insane. So yeah, Blizzard have, they obviously went really deep into RNG with this expansion. The people who were dinged the hardest by this were, of course, the poor old Mythic Plus players. I mean, you know, thankfully they were getting free handouts in the form of Warfronts, but still, 1 bit of Azerite gear per week was kind of rough for that. So yeah, in case you weren't caught up, basically you had a chance to get 1 bit of Azerite gear per week from the Mythic dungeon chest. Now, of course, you could get nothing, and if you were a Mythic Plus only player, then your only other bets were basically the emissary caches that could go up to 370 now. The thinking from Blizzard was basically that infinitely grinding M+ was a problem. Now, sure, that could be an issue, but if you think about it, all dear Azerite gear should be the strongest because it has the raid-specific traits. Therefore, in my head, grinding out Mythic Plus near infinitely shouldn't be much of a problem, especially because the Mythic Plus Azerite gear can't Titanforge. But anyway, this Mythic Plus gearing was a major point of criticism. Now, Blizzard have decided to answer that criticism in patch 8.1 by adding a new currency. Yep, a new currency. That's something I didn't think I would hear, and here's basically how it works. The weekly Mythic Plus chest is going to give you a currently unnamed Mythic Plus currency. Now, it's going to work rather exponentially, such that, for example, if you were to do a Mythic Plus 10, you would get significantly more of the currency than doing a Mythic Plus 7. And their goal is that you will get enough of the currency per week to get an Azerite bit of gear for about the correct item level for the Mythic Pluses that you're running. Now, in addition to this, Azerite gear can then be broken down with the Scrapper for some more of this new currency, though only the Battle for Azeroth Season 2 Azerite gear, so there's no point in saving up what you currently have. Okay, so you might be wondering, how do you spend this new currency? Well, there's a few ways. So the vendor will sell a random bit of Azerite gear via a token for any slot with versions that are 355, 370, and 385, with of course the higher item levels costing more of the new currency. Then the vendor will also sell specific items at item level 385, but at a premium price. Now, Lore ended by his post by saying that the goal with the currency is that you'll be able to purchase one of these Azerite caches per every 2 weeks. That roughly lines up with the Mythic Plus Keystone level that you're doing, and the 385 specific pieces are pretty much a long-term goal for the top-end player. So it seems like the 385s, they're going to be very expensive, maybe only the domain of the Mythic Raiders who are scrapping Mythic level Azerite gear or something like that. So overall, here's the deal. I think this is a good step forward, but it's still very much within the paradigm of randomness of BfA. Now, imagine back in TBC or Wrath having your badges give you a random bit of gear. So in this system, you could spend 2 weeks to earn a cache, and then the contents of that cache are completely random. That means that people will, more likely than not, be disappointed. Now, here's the thing. If you could just buy that gear directly off a vendor, maybe cap to 370 and get the gear that you want, you could do, one of those every 2 weeks, that would be enough that one spec would keep you going for 6 weeks. Perhaps a few months for 2 or 3 specs. Now that is more than enough engagement for this system. The randomness isn't needed. Imagine getting this currency for 2 weeks and then getting a dud bit of gear that just goes into the Scrapper. What decent human would design an interaction for another human to go through that is like that? I just don't think Blizzard have thought about that. I mean, sure, this being a currency is a good thing, but right now it's not nearly far enough. We have just shifted the randomness back from being on the chest to being to a vendor, but it's still there. And these specific pieces, the specific pieces here seem like they're going to be priced exorbitantly. So Blizzard, you have created a system where someone could, work for weeks and then get something of very little value. Do you actually understand how that feels to people? are you actually thinking about player perspective first with the design of this expansion, or are you primarily concerned with creating a game that one could technically play forever? Because I think you're really confused, Blizzard. Look, I'm doing a games company right now, and the current loot system of WoW, for me, it's like a cautionary tale. It's the thing to not do. It's imprinted on my mind the importance of respecting players. You know, they say that doing a startup, which is what I'm doing, is like having a kid, and I kind of get that. I mean, sure, I'm 24, but I've ended up in a position where I've got very limited free time. That means that free time is really important to me. Now, WoW is an old game, and many of you, like many of the players of this game, you've got kids, you've got jobs, maybe a job that requires you to work more than 40 hours a week. So your free time is of the utmost importance. So Blizzard, your job is to create a world for people to enjoy in that tiny slice of free time. Or, you know, if we're to use the industry lingo that I know you know, the player story. Bob is a busy man. He has an hour a day to play WoW, maybe two. After a few weeks, Bob has enough currency for the item that he wants. Oh dear, turns out the item was trash. Now, you might jokingly say in your Q&A, oh, it's only a 5% DPS difference. Yeah, sure, that might be factually true, but it doesn't feel good. Games are emotionally driven, humans are emotional beings, and there are times where WoW feels like it has been developed by an AI that does not understand people, but that was trained using Vegas and mobile games as its dataset. So yeah, this is an appeal to emotion. I think that you, Blizzard, need to understand that your goal in making a game that is endlessly engaging, you know, you've came up with a grand plan that does not account for human nature and human emotions. You've focused on the 2-minute feeling of excitement for a Titan Forge over the long-term sense of accomplishment and of meaning. So as the back half of this video, I think very much does say, I'm happy they're doing a currency, I'm happy they're making some of these changes, but I still need to impress upon Blizzard, because I know there are some Blizzard people that will watch this, trust me, I know. I need to impress upon them the basic issue with how they are doing RNG. Now, there's a few things that I want to use this as a jumping off board to talk about. One of them is, I want to talk about PvP, but I'm going to hit Diablo 3 first, because right now, World of Warcraft, it's almost more Diablo than Diablo in terms of the randomness and the currency systems. Like, Diablo actually has more of those things than WoW does. Now, here's the thing about Diablo 3. Is it a bit of a slot machine game? Absolutely it is. But here's the thing. Diablo is mostly a solo game. And, I mean, maybe not for the most hardcore people, but for many people, D3 is a pretty solo game. You're doing greater rifts. You're going through them super fast. So the iteration time, which basically is how many, you know, pulls of the slot machine you do, that's really, really fast with D3. And that essentially means that, sure, it's a very random game, but you're doing enough sort of swings of it that it feels okay. But here's the problem with World of Warcraft. If you're only doing one of those things every 2 weeks, then you have a lot riding on that one bit of randomness. And the problem with that is that I think Blizzard, with human nature, they really mess it up. People are beasts of burden, right? We all like to set a goal and work towards it. The other thing about human nature is that humans, we tend to focus a little bit more on the negatives than the positives. And I mean, so much of the modern day shows you that. But, if you were to say win 20 pounds and then lose 20 pounds, overall, you'd probably feel bad, right? Because humans, we tend to be a little bit more focused on the negative. That's just how psychology works. So the whole thing, the whole point of this is, if you build up currency for 2 weeks and then you're putting it into a random roll, and there's a very high chance of that random roll going badly, well, Blizzard, it doesn't matter what your bad luck protection is. None of that stuff matters. Chances are you will have just created a very negative experience for your player. And, it's like every time someone engages with your game, their opinion either goes up a little bit or down a little bit. One of those two things happens. The problem with Battle for Azeroth is that it's created a very small number of times where your opinion goes up, but it's created loads of chances, loads of opportunities for disappointment. And that's how I would basically characterize much of the criticism of the endgame of this expansion. Because back in the day, and I hate saying back in the day, I know it sounds silly, but I would know that I could spend 2 weeks to get a certain bit of gear. Now, the thing was that a lot of that gear on the vendors, it wasn't perfect, it wasn't ideal, But the whole point was that the overall pacing of gearing meant that the first like 60%, 70% of my gearing process, it felt fair and it felt earned. Past that, you know, maybe I was getting my badges of frost for repeated kills and I was just going for the regular boss drops. But the thing was that back then, back in Wrath, maybe back in parts of Mop, I would just be, you know, doing bosses. Maybe I'd get some loot, maybe I wouldn't. But the thing is that because I was raiding in a guild, I was with a team of people. If somebody else, maybe the other hunter, got a bit of gear that they didn't need, or maybe the gear was better for me, they could trade it to me. We could work together as a team. You can't do that in World of Warcraft anymore because of the changes to personal loot and master loot. A lot of this just comes down to Blizzard are trying to craft this almost grand, I don't want to say utopian, but in their head I think it's utopian, this perfect system where all of their random numbers are perfectly balanced such that Blizzard can bring up a bell curve of where players fall in terms of loot acquisition and the numbers are all trending upwards and it's all looking good. But I think that in having that perspective, and Blizzard, like, I know there's probably some people at Blizz who see this video and they think you're not being fair to us, that's not what I think. Well, I'll say this to you. From the player's perspective, from the people who engage with your game systems, from the other side, that is, I think, how many of us perceive what you're doing. So whether that's your intent or not, I think you need to listen to how people perceive. If you look online, I don't think what I'm saying here is a controversial opinion. Loads of people, we've been playing World of Warcraft for 14 years, for 13 years, or 12 years, 10 years, whatever. We've been playing it for a long ass time. That means we're really deeply invested in the game, and I think that's why people are so disappointed and exasperated by this point at just how things have been going. So that's essentially my point that started off talking about Diablo 3 and how it seems like Blizzard took a lot of inspiration from its loot system, but I think they fundamentally misunderstood Diablo 3 and they also misunderstood World of Warcraft at the same time, and they created some sort of Frankenstein's monster hodgepodge of the two games that doesn't really work. It doesn't succeed in the way that World of Warcraft can succeed, and it also doesn't succeed in the way that Diablo can succeed, and that's a big problem. Now, in their post, Blizzard also mentioned PvP, so I quickly want to hop over to that because PvP is something that I've been using as a big example of a lot of my criticisms for the last few weeks. So with PvP, we have this conquest bar on our UI, and this has a fixed path of gearing throughout the weeks. There's no way you can change it. The conquest that you get, it's not a currency. So, like, Blizzard's plan was basically, or what they literally said to us was, okay, so back in the day, you go to a conquest vendor, and if you're a hardcore PvPer, there was a specific way that you would get your gear. Like, there was just a right and a wrong way to do it. Okay, I get where they're coming from there. And they said that by putting all of the PvP gear in a linear progression on your UI, they thought it would be more clear, more easy, and the players couldn't make a mistake. Okay, well, what has that done, Blizzard? I'm now at a stage where I maybe have like a 340, or not 340, say a 370, right? Maybe from the Warfront cache, or maybe I'm a raider, so I've got loads of 370 gear. So I've got good gear as an example. I then look at my PvP UI, and oh, it's a downgrade. This week's PvP gear is useless, and the only way for me to get to next week's PvP gear is to unlock this week's. And that's where I think they've really got a lot of things backwards, whereas in a currency system, if I just got conquest points, then sure, if I was a hardcore PvPer, I'd be buying all my PvP gear in the right order. But if I was doing a hybrid gearing system through multiple different avenues, well, I could gather up my currency and then, you know, maybe legs are like the 8th, you know, stage down, like they're week 8 of the PvP progression system of BfA. Well, maybe legs are the things that I want, and I've, you know, got my 2,000 conquests. Can I just not buy some legs, Blizzard? Oh, no. Turns out I've got to go through 8 conquest bars to do that. Guys, it doesn't make sense. Your game doesn't make sense. You've spent so much time trying to tightly craft a player experience that you've forgotten how players play your game. And, like, I know I've been guilty of this in the past myself, because doing some of my game design stuff, there's times, you know, I would have, maybe 2 years ago, I would have locked myself you know, in a room, right? And I would have just got my documents, my Excel spreadsheet, and I would have came up for, you know, with some master plan. And then I'd soon realize, hang on a second, this is a big master plan that is based on my personal assumptions of how someone's going to play this game. And then I'd think about it more, and I'd realize this is too rigid, right? This isn't, this does not contain the breadth of, you know, this doesn't allow for the breadth of experience of how I want people to play my game. And I'd always come to the conclusion of, I need to free things up a little bit. I think Blizzard are really struggling with that right now. So while I am happy that they're bringing in this new currency, I think that absolutely is a good thing, there's still a lot of RNG, and I'm still not totally convinced they understand the problem. You know, I've been talking about how I think that World of Warcraft's problems are philosophical in nature. I think that the direct problems that maybe some people feel right now with BfA, they are just literal problems that could be patched out super quickly. But I think that the reason that those problems came about is because the fundamental design philosophy of Blizzard in regards to World of Warcraft is wrong. It is not in alignment with humans, human emotions, human nature. It's so depersonalized, so disconnected from the human experience of playing a game like World of Warcraft. You know, it's got this fake, artificial excitement that, at the end of the day, robs the game of meaning. And I think of anything, World of Warcraft succeeded on ownership of your success, and meaning in the long term. And I think that is the beating heart of the game, and I think they've really eroded at that. So, to, you know, make this a little, you know, to throw some levity into this video, this currency system is a good idea. It could mean that Blizzard, you know, get it a little bit more, but right now I'm just a little bit concerned that Blizzard are treating this like a bandage fix, a quick fix that they slap on in a patch. Yes, it's good, but I view my role here as being talking about the fundamental design philosophies and not just being laser focused on the day-to-day problem right now. Because if we do that too much, we lose perspective, and I think the perspective is really important. So there you go. I understand that, like, this was technically a positive video. I am happy about the change, but I get that it probably doesn't feel positive to you watching it right now. It doesn't exactly feel positive to me saying all these things right now. But as I said at the start of the video, I think they've given us an inch. We need to make them realize why we are happy about that inch and convince them to give us a mile. Because as much as I can sit here and say, oh, they've given us an inch, let's take a mile. We can't take a mile. At the end of the day, we have just about very little power over this. What we need to do is convince Blizzard with arguments. And, you know, points, not arguments, that's a little bit too harsh. You know, we need to make good points, essentially, is what I'm saying. And that's really the point of this video. I'm trying to say to Blizzard, look, people probably are happy that you've put this currency in, but you've got to understand why they're happy. You've got to understand why they want a currency system. You've got to understand how that, like, what that means to people and how that influences the way that they will play the game and how they value the time that they play the game. It's not about how fast you get rewards. I think that's something you could accidentally, or, you know, maybe if I've not communicated right, you could take away from this video that I just want quick rewards from a vendor. That's not the case. I want slower rewards overall than what we have now. My point is, I would like gearing to maybe be half as fast. But the point is that by, you know, you absolutely progressing by putting time into the game, you feel like your time is being respected, rather than you taking loads of individual dice rolls where your time is either worth a lot or worth nothing. What I would rather want is a smooth progression where you can say, I'm going to play World of Warcraft, I'm going to set this goal for myself, and I am going to achieve it along with my friends. And when I say along with my friends, hey Blizzard, your personal loot system, big mistake. You should put master loot in. You know, I should be able to help out my friend if I get a bit of gear that I think they would appreciate more than I would. I mean, come on. It's a massively multiplayer online role-playing game. Multiplayer. The game's built in community. Don't rob people of that. So there you go. That's this video. Little bit impromptu, taking the place of the regular Saturday news video. The Saturday news will be out tomorrow. Totally appreciate that this is probably not a fun video to watch. It's probably a more divisive video. That's just how it is. That's just how I feel about the game right now. So let me know what you think about all these topics down in the comments below. But with that, thank you very much for bearing with me for this, and I'll see you next time.